Good morning, and thank you for joining us. Today, we'll be exploring possibilities of our near future with Jared Ficklin, Chief Creative Technologist at argodesign. Jared is an innovator by nature, always exploring new ways to interact with technology, and he has a passion for unique interaction models, especially those involving touch, multi-touch, voice, gesture, and projection. He spent 14 years at Frog Design contributing to the visions, IP, and products of companies like HP, Microsoft, AT&T, and Motorola. And his work there led him to be named one of 4 Frog Fellows. Jared is an evangelist and co-creator of the mass transport vision known as The Wire, and was the first to bring live fire to the TED stage. Without further ado, Jared Ficklin.
Hello, thank you, Carla, and welcome to our webinar. Just a quick note, we did 2 of these sessions. So if you're watching this back on demand, as we say, and it doesn't match perfectly what you saw earlier today, that's why. Also, the earlier one was just completely generated by AI and not even real. So this is the better one anyways, because it's me. All right, navigating the AI sea change. Let's talk a little bit about technology, futurism, and AI. Now, this is the title that ChatGPT chose for my presentation after giving it a summary. The one I chose originally was called Help for Humans, because there's a lot of technologies out there today that are basically saying that they're going to be a big help for human. Well, are they going to be a help for human? And how can we make sure that they are something that helps advance humanity? That's one of the things we're going to discuss here. And I think that's important because while we all kind of have this feeling, I think, that there are a lot of promising technologies here, and that ChatGPT and Midjourney and generative AI is going to be a lot more useful than just, generating pictures of that time you hung out with the Pope at Burning Man. So let's start here. We're going to examine a little bit this moment where we are in history, which is a sea change of technology. And we're going to talk a little bit about traditional AI. And yeah, there's traditional AI now, how it's expanding and moving downstream. We will also talk about generative AI. There's only so many specifics we can get to there because, it seems to be changing every 5 minutes. But we will speak about some of the direct values already being recognized, as well as potential adjacent values, and how you can incorporate those as a designer, developer, or a business. And then we're going to talk a little bit about adoption scenarios. And we'll do this at a high level, because once again, tactics are a little unknown, and we'll get that at the end. But first, let's ground ourselves solidly in the future. Let's take ourselves to the year 2030. This is what Midjourney thinks 2030 Austin looks like. I think we as Austinites would prefer this. We'll notice that there is no traffic. We have our light rail system. Maybe that explains why, although we can see that it doesn't always run on schedule. And that sounds a lot like Austin, so I think Midjourney is very sophisticated there. We are now in 2030 at the dawn of a real-time internet. That's a mere 7 years from today. The digital lifestyle has changed us radically, more than the previous 50 years. And we live differently. We don't simply use technology anymore. We are entangled with our technology, and the lines between our intelligence and that of the objects around us are very fuzzy, and they're changing rapidly. We are openly questioning our humanness, and factions are arguing about the balance between biological imperative and technically assisted evolution. At a broad level, computing is now generative. We simply ask for what we want. Computing output itself now exceeds that of human perception. The latest NVIDIA video card can render more colors than even the eye can perceive, and it can do it at frame rates past what even the brain can comprehend. We're already able to process mathematics and data and store libraries of information vastly beyond human comprehension. Now the output itself also exceeds that, which will begin to beg what is reality, the lower or higher fidelity. Intelligence itself is going to move down from the cloud into our devices, while these large generative AI models are very expensive to train. They're not always very expensive to run, and people are already experimenting with throwing them on things like Raspberry Pi. So the idea that you can train a module and put it down to devices, save a trip to the cloud, is going to be a likely scenario. And of course, robots. There'll be robots everywhere, and really the limiting factors of robots are being killed off every day, including the ability for comprehension and general artificial intelligence. And other attributes of 2030, if we were to come down a level, would be we now own our own data. There are now data marketplaces. The economy has kind of moved the crypto movement off to the side, and now we can use the Web3 technologies to generate true value. And one of the things that's likely to come from that is a very worldwide blockchain or series of them where each of us can be a block on that change. Our data can all be aggregated there. Services will happily check out what we allow them to and check back in what we want, allowing us to contract for that. We have a very good future vision piece on this called the Me Ring that you can go and look up. But having a data marketplace is going to allow us to transact with a higher level of interoperability, and that will really help when we start thinking about the real-time internet. Generative AI will not just create images or movies or songs or essays to turn into your high school teacher and see if they catch you, but you'll be able to invoke entire experiences. You could say, hey Siri, help me fold the laundry, and it's going to code up an app in real time and begin running it. More on that later. At this point, pull markets may have almost entirely been converted to push markets. Everything from Amazon to your kitchen countertop will know your preferences at a level that they can begin just pushing individualized products to you. Meanwhile, the cost of manufacturing has been coming down. This is something as product designers we've been dealing with for a couple of decades now, right? That the cost of manufacturing used to mean there had to be a large demand pulling something into the marketplace. Well, manufacturing is now getting so inexpensive that you could actually have speculative products that you list, or products with shorter runs that are more personalized, or even deep fake products that are never intended to exist at all, just steal your money. But also, a lot of what's been preventing the countertop manufacturing, micro-manufacturing movement from taking place has been the interface itself. It's very hard to model things in 3D or even go to websites that have catalogs of 3D objects and then print them. But you can see the way the natural language works with ChatGPT that I really could just say, hey, print me a new coffee cup. I could get a short menu of potential coffee mugs that are generated in real time, select one, and then it prints out in my on my kitchen countertop. Tupperware, a replacement part for a Roku remote, all these kind of things that could happen. Also, what we could expect out of this is that maybe there is now an Amazon Prime tomorrow, right? Meaning that what it anticipates you need is already delivered at your door before you realize that you need it. Also, we'll begin to be trading in prompts. Designers, developers, certainly, but I even think common people are going to be trading in prompts because so much of the world will be generative and created in real time, right? And so in the way that we now share, hey, have you tried out this app? Now we're going to be sharing, hey, have you tried out this prompt? And vocabulary and the ability to form a prompt will now become a skill, and the very specificity of vocabulary become a very valuable thing. This is already true with things like Midjourney and DALL-E. Those that know photography as a legacy art can actually speak specifically to certain lenses, certain focal lengths, certain film types, and all that vocabulary actually allows them to create a better result. So the number of words that you know and what they mean is going to become a big differentiator in this thing, and it'll be talked about at the water cooler constantly. Also, the accessibility of compute time and the ability to form a query prompt is potentially starting to form new classes, and it's a much talked about thing in 2030 about how we're going to catch up certain segments of the world or population that just don't know how to speak to computers correctly. That might be how we put it. we will question every day if the technology is helping to advance us as humans, or perhaps is simply turning us into the robots. And one of the greatest philosophical and ethical arguments of the day, which has already begun, frankly, is about if we should create life itself and become gods, whether we should begin treating AI with rights, whether we should consider it a new form of life or an advancement of humanity. And to sum that all up, we're really in the midst of a technological sea change. And that was a fun bit of futurism. And it's the type of futurism that, not unlike the large data models that generative AI has spawned, it's a form of extrapolation. It's kind of like extrapolation. It's kind of like what Sid Mead did when he painted the future. He always just said, I just paint today like it's tomorrow. And I think the signals for all these things are very much apparent now. And I'm going to talk a lot about this in the next few minutes, and we'll make some predictions, and we might be off a little bit, but I really don't think we are off by more than 10 years on any of this, barring some huge natural or technical chaos that arrests the project. And while this may create some anxiety to talk about things like how technology is in competition with humanity, that's not my goal. I can sense that anxiety anytime I bring this topic up. My goal is an open and authentic discussion about balancing technology and biology, or intellect and love, if you will, and hopefully make everyone the right kind of anxious, the kind that makes us realize that we have lived in a 200-year track record of improving things for humanity with technology. As such, we have oriented ourselves around deployment. Anytime we come up with a new technology, we think we need to get it in the hands of many people as possible. We focus on logistics and friction. But now we have the idea that not all technology advances humanity, and that perhaps we should think about whether we should deploy a technology. And people are asking that question about AI and robotics and other technologies like coolers with blenders on them every day. And increasingly, it is the number one question as product designers, developers, and business owners we should ask ourselves. So we'll discuss that a little bit at the end as well. But for now, let's talk more about the characteristics of this technology sea change that we are right in the middle of. I would put things into three big categories of catalysts here, just to bundle them together. On one side is the new devices, everything from robotics to wearable mobile computers. All these things are really on the cusp of becoming real, and they're really going to change the way we interface with technology. On one side, we're going to have human analogs or features that really have so much automation that they do it themselves, kind of like the robot that mows my lawn every Friday and Tuesday. I don't have to worry about it anymore. It just does it. The feature is a lawn that is mowed. Right? And in industrial settings, you may have humanoid robots with enough general intelligence, enough comprehension to interact with them on kind of a human basis. And ironically, it really looks like, especially in early days, they're going to take the jobs of other robots that are too specific. And those robots are going to want to move down market, which is going to lead to a case where we have a lot more single function robots in our homes. Now, on new devices, in 5 to 7 short years, we're going to be able to have wearable mobile computers in about this size and form factor, which will lead to a heavy adoption. And what that's really going to do is it's going to extend computing to the other half of our life where we want to be heads up and present. Our immersive devices with screens, like our handheld mobile computers, also known as iPhones and Android phones, already suck up 50% of our attentive life and 50% of the workforce. Anything where things are abstract. And on the other side, things that deal with the physical world at a one-to-one scale, or where we need to be heads up and attentive, present, these devices will exist. You can see how comprehension and voice recognition and GAI will play into that a little later on. Next is decentralization. The data marketplace talked about earlier is part of that. A lot of the Web 3.0 technologies will lead to a slightly different architecture of the web, which is going to help with interoperability. we're going to see a move from, dumb sensing to intelligent edge computing. A lot of computing is going to come out of the cloud and sit on the edge. We're going to see a movement from big data down to insight-based systems and a democratization of the components of creation here, low code and no code interfaces, all this will be covered in a second. And of course, generative AI, which is a huge topic and a huge advancement. I think it's important to realize then that technological sea changes, and why it's a sea change is because we kind of have this notion that there's a technological constant, belief in Moore's law and the way things deploy lead us to believe that it's this kind of like maybe exponentially rising curve. But the truth is these things happen in big stair steps. And this means that as designers or developers or businesses, we find ourselves in one of two conditions. We're either above the technology line and we have a good understanding of it, and therefore we're in a deployment phase. Our focus there is on finding value, reducing friction, and closing gaps. And we say great value comes from closing small gaps. We've been in one of those periods about since 2007. But then there's these other areas where we're underneath the technology curve and we don't really understand it. We have to explore it quite a bit. We have to be more presumptive in our applications of it. And we get nervous during those periods because we don't know where technology is going to go. We don't know, should I be adopting this? Did I already miss an opportunity? Do I need to join this movement? Do I need to reshape my business model? And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about later. You can see this nervousness out in the market in big ways. Just couple days ago, we had an IPCC moment for AI where 1,100 notable signatories signed an open letter to the world asking that all AI labs immediately pause their development for at least 6 months so ethics and humanity can catch up. There's some really important people on this list. There's also some aestheticians on that list, but I think this is something that affects all of humanity, so that's okay. And I understand this sentiment because as someone who's been working in AI for a while now, it's easy to see that this latest round of AI was not really architected perhaps for responsibility. And I think people are catching up. More on that later. The sum of this is that during these periods of exploration where we're really below the technology curve, is really important to be presumptive. It's really important to be explorative, and think by making is more important than ever because you're in a unique space where technology is new enough that it lacks familiarity and there's no convention to talk to, and you really just don't know where it's going to deploy, and likely it's going to lead to very novel scenarios. So you can't just go ask people, how would you use GAI as a car company? They have no idea. In Western cultures, they're just going to lie to you. So you really end up having to turn to the technology and ask it, what value do you have for my organization, for my application, for humanity itself? And the way to investigate that is by using it so you get a real sense for the feel of how it works. That type of deep exploration is something that we have loved to do and have done a lot over the years. Now's a good time to lean into it. All right, so now let's get into some of the meat of it. And let's begin by talking about traditional AI. And yes, there is now a traditional AI. It's funny to think about that, but really AI has been known about for many decades and has been deploying for much more than a decade now. And my personal and argodesign involvement in the deployment of AI date back to 9 years. Our very first client was Cognitive Scale, which is a cloud AI platform. So we've been spending a lot of time deploying this traditional machine learning, and that's the term we really preferred for a lot of years. No one was really ready to ascribe the kind of intelligence to these open loop algorithms that would, use the term AI. We use machine learning a lot more. And at the beginning, machine learning was really an accessory to the sensing and big data movement. We talked a lot about dark data. You suddenly had this ability to store all your data. You had this ability with networking to put switches and sensors everywhere in an environment like a factory floor. And then you had the computational power algorithmically to look at this data in volumes and quantities and ways that humans really just didn't have the time to do. And it would turn up insights, what we call dark data. We really used these terms back then. Remember those buzzwords that you had dark data and sensing? Really, it was just insights. But there wasn't a lot of place to put those insights except for into its own data store, but also maybe on some dashboards or into reports. And the reason is really a lot of organizations had a lot of application developers, but they didn't have a lot of data scientists or AI engineers, and there wasn't enough familiarity between the two to start making this data more actionable. And that was the next phase of this. Now that we were starting to generate these insights, people started wanting to use them. And early on, that looked like bespoke solutioning. And these were big solutions that took a lot of time to deploy. And it's around this that the cloud platforms started coming into the story. And Cognitive Scale is one of those platforms. AWS, Azure, a lot of other parties began offering orchestrations of machine learning as cloud SaaS offerings, okay? And what this did was democratize the capabilities a little more. So like with Cortex 5, we designed an interface so that your more traditional application developer could leverage the skills and the syndicated data of data scientists and AI engineers into agents, right? And so we gave them an interface where they could absorb these skills, like they could find a module that was really good at identifying green shirts. They could find a module that looked at someone's purchase history and really identified what their preferences were. And you could string that all together into a simple like API service that you could hit, give it a little bit of data in, and what it would return was, okay, this person likes green shirts. Let's, offer them these green shirts out of our catalog, or all kinds of little things. And what it did is it took the insights out of the database and started making them more available in real time, right? So you could have an AI listening, for instance, to someone talking about a derivatives contract in one of 7 different languages that could correctly identify the language, pass that on to another skill that would look for voice recognition and do that from speech to text, and then another one that look at that text and find the shorthand phrases that represent the attributes of the derivative contract, and then enter those values into an input field. And what that service would do would allow you to create a pricing contract in 90 seconds faster than if a human was trying to type them in. And that kind of arbitrage was available all over the place, right? And so insights started to become actionable. Now, as cloud platforms, these are a lot more accessible now. It used to be that these were the strategies of very large companies with very large RT departments. They had very large of their own data stores and their own IT their own large cohorts, like insurance companies, finance companies, big industrial concerns that had lots of factories, lots of equipment. But increasingly, this is moving downstream, both in cost and capability, due to things like these cloud platforms that allow you to orchestrate solutions. All right. The next thing that started happening and is ongoing is that these insights started showing up into products as features, right? A great early case study of this was the Google Clip. This was a camera that had an onboard machine learning module. So it had ML on a chip, and you would just leave the camera on all the time and walk around. And the machine learning module, it would identify moments that it thought were highly likely to be ones that a human would want out of a situation. So differentiated enough. And so it started pressing the capture button or the shutter command. And at the end of the day, you just looked at a bunch of clips without as much garbage as you would normally have from that. So it was automating things. Other insights as a feature could be like a machine learning module that could identify glass breaking, or often any remote where you do voice on command. So there's a lot of these companies out there right now that are AI on a chip, machine learning on the chip. A really exciting one, and Blaze AI is one that we worked with. And when we were working in this space, you need to be able to train the model. You need to know that it's working well. And then you need to be able to push it down on the chip. And now it becomes a module that can go into your product. And so all of a sudden these insights are breaking away from a big data model and they're starting to move downstream into products as well. So both of these are happening right now, ongoing, and I would expect them to benefit greatly from this generative AI, and we'll get to that in a moment. But first, we're going to take a little side journey into a cul-de-sac for this model on the chip thing. We worked with this company, Aspinity, and what Aspinity stands for is analog signal processing to infinity. Why analog signal processing? Because they have slayed some of the dragons in the space of analog computing. It's an interesting history to go and YouTube and explainer video on what is analog computing, but believe it or not, analog computing is something that existed first before digital computing. Digital computing was a solution for signal instability in analog computing by really forcing the signal to be a 1 or a 0. So now we've actually brought stability back to the point where you can do runs of millions of chips that will give the same results in different temperature and humidity based on the same inputs. And the advantages are really fascinating. One is that we may not realize this, but if you were to map the world's energy production against how quickly we are using electricity just for computation, you would see that they cross over around 2040. That's when we run out of electricity. If we don't greatly increase the kind of supply we have or greatly reduce the amount of energy we're using for computing. This is one route to do that because analog computers use a lot less energy just in the way that they function because they're not using 8 registers and they're not using analog to digital conversion, right? What this means in real terms is if you have a voice remote, it has an analog digital computer. It has a little bit of a machine learning module that's listening for a wake word all the time. And because of that whole architecture, the battery life is 8 months. Well, if you were to convert that architecture to pure analog all the way to the wake word, you could have a 5-year battery life. Or as a product designer, if you realize consumers are willing to accept changing a battery every 8 months, it means I could use A4 batteries and completely reinvent what a remote looks like. But there's more than that too, because when you put sensors everywhere, you end up with a problem. That problem is that right now, those sensors turn on and they traffic HD levels of data to the cloud where the processing is done looking for insights, right? And that creates a lot of bandwidth, a lot of storage, as well as the more expensive. So computationally and power-wise, it's really heavy. Well, if you can move intelligence to the edge, let's say you have a sensor with a machine learning module that all in an analog architecture can listen to a piezo or a vibration sensor, and it's stuck to the back of your toilet, and it's smart enough to tell what's a flapper leak versus a flush. Well, the thing doesn't have to wake up and send HD data. It can sit there for 5 years, and if there's a leak, it can just wake up a radio and send a simple text message, mere bytes or kilobytes of data saying there's a flapper leak. Or if you put it on a motor, it might say there's a vibration that is a bearing going out, as opposed to just sending recordings of vibration or saying there is a vibration. This does a lot of things. It reduces the amount of cloud computing we have to do, but it also moves intelligence down to the edge, which could completely reform business models itself. So for instance, right now, you might have like 20 stacker units out at your like gravel mine. Those are those big conveyor belts that make big piles of gravel, and they all have a bunch of motors and rollers on them and hundreds of bearings. Well, if you have an inexpensive sensor sitting there on a battery power for years, just listening to those vibrations in analog, running a machine learning algorithm sophisticated enough to notice that the vibration indicates a bearing's going out, well, it could send off an insight to say this bearing is going out. Well, instead of going into an architecture or having a $30,000 a year service contract, you could actually then build a system on the back of that says, okay, I'm going to quickly query service providers for what it costs to repair a bearing. And then I could just offer you an interface that says, okay, bearing going out, which one of these providers do you want to schedule to replace it? So you can see there's a lot of efficiencies to be gathered here by moving from big data to an insight-based architecture. And what is happening with the large language models in terms of comprehension of human language as well as human systems is only going to accelerate that kind of a model. All right, But also, as you can see there, insights then become actionable, right? And we're seeing this in the news right now with ChatGPT as they start adding plugins that allow it to go to the web and order a product, right? More on that later. For now, let's talk about the traditional AI view of this, which turns out to be a little more generative than we thought, right? We worked on something called Cortex 6, right? So after you have insights and you can be using them in real time, you start wanting to convert them into actions and give them a goal and a task, or a campaign in business speak, right? And so what you can do with Cortex 6 is a subject matter expert, and this is an interface we designed because interface is one of the biggest problems with new technologies. So in order to have business owners or subject matter experts do this, we create an interface where they could design a goal. Let's say you're an insurance company. You've got 20 million users. Some of them are diabetics, and you want to keep them out of the emergency room because it's better for their health and it's better for their bottom line. Right? So what you do is you start imagining the interventions that you could take on them. For instance, they have an upcoming doctor's appointment. Do you send them a text message? Do you send them an email? Do you call them on the phone with a recording, a live person? Do you just send an Uber right to their house and say, your doctor's appointment is in an hour, get in the Uber, right? All these are different interventions. Going to the doctor could identify some care options that would keep them out of the emergency room later. That's a whole, bunch of interventions, right? Which are the right ones? Well, they're going to change on a per user basis. So you can detail all these interventions. Developers can then come in and hook in different agents, ways to fulfill them with services. You can then model the whole thing and simulate it. You can look at the plans of care that are created over time and the amount of savings it creates until you're really happy with the thing, and then you can operationalize it and deploy it, right? Now AI has the power to generate an intervention for any given single cohort for any given moment of context and time to a benefit of the goal. In this case, keeping diabetics out of the emergency room. This also could be like replacing bearings in a printing press, right? Or maintenance in a factory, right? The cohort could be anything along with humans. This type of generative computing exists in numerous places, but it's one of the things that cognitive scale has a specialty in terms of the interface, right? So you can see that even in the world of traditional AI, we continue to progress very well, and a lot of this has become a lot more accessible. So it's not just a strategy for large businesses with large cohorts and data anymore because there's so many cloud providers that can bring those insights and interventions down. There's also now models that have been trained and can be leveraged by you if you don't have a larger data set. And there's also beginning to be data sets that are franchised and licensable again. So all of it is part of this move to the insight-based process as opposed to big data. Another interesting example of this in terms of maturing traditional AI that's on the cusp, or actually is generative AI, is a client builder AI. They want to be a Squarespace of app development, basically. But they use AI throughout the process. It's been architected for that. And so one of the places it's used is you may call up a project manager, and you may talk about the features you want for your app, like it's a Tinder for dogs or something. So you want people to be able to swipe, you want a profile, you need a login. And while you're doing this, an AI is listening to the conversation and identifying and standardizing the features so that it could be fulfilled by iOS or Android conventions. Then it can create an architecture. Then that can be farmed out to modules, which are currently coded up or pulled out of a library. But increasingly, we're seeing that ChatGPT and other large language models are quite capable, since they were trained on the billions instances of codes, of writing that code themselves. So you can see why early on, when we were talking about the real-time internet, we have this confidence that before too long, you'll be able to just say, hey, Siri, help me organize my bookshelf, and it will, in real time with a local model, code up an application with all the steps for you to go through. It might identify the books. It may ask you want it by color, by size, by date, by author. It may be able to reach out, spider out, and assign a price value for each book. So if you have too many of them, you could sell the expensive. It might identify the first editions for you. And then when you finish all of that, the app just goes away. And your data is checked up into that data marketplace in the cloud, ready to be used for the next time you invoke an application. That's a very different model to where we live today in the App Store, but it's on the way. So if we were to sum this up in big trends in traditional AI, as a designer, developer, or a business, you should look for these things. They can be signals. Along with the moving down market of these things and the cost and accessibility getting easy, we're seeing a lot of low code and no code interfaces to help with the orchestration and deployment of these types of solutions. This is actually a general trend that also applies to workflows as well, but it's very prevalent in the AI space because we have so few AI engineers and data specialists, and yet we have so many application developers and subject matter experts. We're starting to see insights go from part of the record to features. Those features are now deployable ever closer. These insights are deployable in real time, or they're able to be moved to specific devices to become part of a product. This is through the cloud movement and the machine learning on a chip movement, and it's a really exciting space that promises to re-architect the way computing happens. Then there's automated decision making. AI is moving from recommendations to actually starting to make decisions. And when you do this, it's very important that you have governance, okay? If you're doing something like an insurance or dealing with people's money, there are 3 layers of governance that you need to concern yourself with. One are all the legal regulations that you need to comply with. This thing needs to be random. You need to work all the biases out of it. It needs to be making good choices that don't hurt people. 2, you need to make sure that the algorithms themselves are performing. There are such things as model drift. Your data can change over time. There are versioning and change management concerns that can affect the performance of this. And then at the top level, there's just the performance itself. Is it working? Is it giving you the return on investment you were expecting, right? So along a cognitive scale and elsewhere, along with creating these solutions, we've actually worked really hard to create governance to go side by side on this. Argodesign is actually a member of the Responsible AI Alliance, RAIL, and you can look it up online. And we worked really hard to make sure that these solutions are in place. One thing that we can tell you is in the wild west of generative AI, we see a solution that is very valuable, but probably at this point doesn't have all of that governance put into it. Some of the very basics of what makes an ethical AI, which is provenance, traceability, transparency, we don't see as present. So as we deploy these, there's a lot of catch-up work to be done here so that they deploy in a responsible manner so that you can make sure that they are happening in an ethical way in terms of humanity, that they're following all the proper governance of both regulatory but also performance, and that you're getting the results that you want. And then the last trend is that there is edge intelligence. We're seeing intelligence move to the edge in the sensing movement, which creates a much lower overhead interface, power consumption, and different business models. This is going to be good for humanity ultimately, and it's really what we've been trying to do from the beginning. It's just that we're finally getting to the technological breakthroughs that allow us to do that. Okay, speaking of generative AI, all right, so there's a lot in traditional AI for you there, and let's move on to the world of generative AI. Now, I'm going to speak in some specifics here, but just a quick caveat here. This is changing on a daily and weekly basis. It's a very hard space right now to understand where can I enter or what do I need to prepare for. We really don't know what the pricing models are going to look like long-term. We don't know what the deployment models are going to look like long-term. There's a lot of API and command line interfaces right now. It's just very nascent. But it is the kind of thing we're studying for clients already and looking for direct and indirect and potential future value. So let's talk about some of that, starting with how are we using it? How is it impacting the product design industry itself? Well, there's a lot of new techniques and a lot of new tools, and this is very exciting, but it's also making people a little nervous. They're like, we all thought AI and robotics was going to kill the blue collar workforce. We were really worried about it, but it looks like it's coming for the white collar first. At least that's what people are nervous about. But really, we've been through this story before, okay? Early in my career, it was very important for me to know the different formats for like CD-ROMs. Remember CD-ROMs? I knew a lot of different video codecs that I don't have to worry about anymore. I knew a whole library of web-safe colors. I knew specific attributes about specific web browsers. I knew a bunch of terminology that had to do with setting up color calls for printing or photography sessions. And the iPhone launched, and a lot of that dropped out of the vocabulary overnight. My talents did not change, but my skill set had to refresh rapidly. And we're in one of those moments right now. And it feels nervous, but the way to get by it is just begin playing with the technology in your free time or integrating it into some of the spaces of your work as quickly as possible. Because we're going to have a whole bunch of new tools to use. Let's go into that a little bit, how we're doing that real quickly. One, you already have the ultimate clip art creator, and you've seen a ton of that in this deck already, and you're going to see a ton more. I really love doing it. It's really fun, actually. It's entertaining. $10 a month gets you so much entertainment. I can remember there was a period with Netflix where people would spend so much time in the interface picking something that it was actually more than they spent time watching things. I think this is before binging, but we coined a term for it. The industry, coined a term for it called menutainment. And you can engage in genutainment right now and just like really have a lot of fun creating these things. But it's more than just fun, because you can do it so fast with such a volume and such a precedent of human history to it that it actually can help be creative. As a professional designer or a developer or product owner, it's really easy to spy little things that go like, oh, that's a good idea. So in that way, in design thinking terms, it's a really good lateral thinking exercise. And the volume is really easy to produce and is very diverse. Here we're imagining an infographic for like a really fast, graphics card. Here is a bunch of interfaces for monitoring the attributes or statistics of a graphic video card. Here's 10,000 logos for a tool that would help you inspect a graphic video card. So you can see this really overnight can reinvigorate and change the level of creativity and the diversity in your creativity. Like it used to be you had to know papercraft as a style to explore it. Well, now you can explore it without knowing it as a style. And that's really exciting for designers. It means that your aperture is broadening greatly. But it doesn't end there. It also goes to text, right? ChatGTP is a very powerful tool. You can not only get it to write things from scratch, like here's a prompt that created a whole user flow. You can actually throw whole notes, right? So there's now AI that takes notes for you. We have one running on this meeting. You can now take those notes, throw them into ChatGTP and ask it to summarize them for you. And it does a pretty good job of it. You can further have it create data sets for it. You can have it create project plans for you. You are going to have to edit them, and as a human, make sure they're good, but they exist. It also writes code. There's people at Argo Design right now who aren't great code writers or have never really written code, writing code now. They're doing it with prompts, and they put that code into environment like Xcode. They get the errors. The ChatGPT solves the errors. So as long as it's pretty conventional code, they can do a pretty good job here, which has been a real boon to prototyping right now. And it kind of predicts a future where pair programming with an AI is going to be something that's very quickly going to show up in tools themselves. And then and that's how its first wave is going to show up. It's going to show up as plugins and little assistants, okay? So here's one where you can use prompts to create different UI, UX layouts. It's called Galileo. Here's a potential plugin that will go in Figma as you design. The genius starts noticing what you're just designing and copying you and designing right next to you, so it's kind of speeding you up in terms of UX and UI and such. Another thing to consider is that old deliverables may become new deliverables, right? Think of this real-time internet, this one where you invoke experiences into place. Like right now, a lot of our design, as you'll see later, is dedicated to identifying context. So we often begin with a customer journey map, and this identifies areas of frictions, opportunities for new values, and then we go on designing state machines to fulfill them, right? So a whole bunch of comps, a whole bunch of design libraries, a whole bunch of rules for what the design should be. But you can imagine a situation where actually the journey map itself starts becoming the deliverable. That if you take this journey and you start finding ways to turn it into various prompts that are going to generate the experience for the user in the style of, or whatever prompt engineering is used at the time, you can see that that can start to become a final deliverable in and of itself, guiding the overall story arc of the user, but not concerning itself so much with the specific details. You may also be taking design libraries, rather than being deliverables to teams to execute upon, they may be deliverables to a model in which to train it on or to narrow its aperture down to a specific deployment. You also may see whole versions of these become their own brands, which we'll talk about later. So I could build an entire website in the style of IKEA. Maybe I'm paying IKEA licensing for that. I don't know. That's something we'll talk about later. The nut of it is that there's going to be a lot of curating here, okay? Humans are still the experts on humans, okay? This is results from Midjourney version 4. Any human can look at this and tell that the hands are messed up because we are experts on what hands are, okay? And we could curate these and find the one that looked the best. Well, when it comes to design, designers are still the experts on design. Developers are still the expert on code, and subject matter experts or business owners are going to be expert on process efficiency and how their business goals are being met. So our role in the future, along with taking on new vocabulary, trading, and prompt, is going to be curators, and the judges are what are good. These look like great interfaces, but I promise you I can show this to any one of my UX or visual designers, and they're going to take off about a dozen really important improvements and a few things that are complete dead ends. I could do the same thing with my technologists. They'd be like, this is all good, but that's an expensive thing to write. And the last thing is that think by making is going to be more important than ever before. We talked about that earlier in terms of exploring. The true way to understand these things are to play with them in any capacity, and I would start that work now. All right. We're getting closer to the end here, so let's start talking about adopting. What are the signals out there that as a designer or developer, or really as a business, that you should start looking to adopt this? Now, this is a hard thing to do because there's not a product I can point you to and say, hey, go check out their demo thing. We're just seeing how this is going to deploy. We're at the point of where there is value here, direct and adjacent, but it's in really a bespoke way. We have a kind of a buzzword for that in our industry. It's called enterprise solutioning, right? And that's the era that we're at, that for the most part, you have to have enough value there to write custom code against it. Now, there's a whole sea of startups up there, and I don't have that slide in my presentation where there were like 10 a year ago, and now there's like 1,000 like attempting to capitalize on OpenAI and generative AI. Continue to watch that space. But there's other direct and adjacent values that we can discuss. Now, I'm going to discuss them in terms of signals and metaphors that you could apply back to your own business to look for value and think, is this a moment where I need to be diving in as an early adopter, where I could be finding efficiencies to add to existing process, or perhaps I just need to be preparing for it in the future, either directly by taking actions to rid myself of certain technical debt, or just sitting back and watching it. Let's start with intelligent interfaces. I'm going to tell a story about a washing machine as an interface. But as I do, the same story applies to an app or maybe a web page or a web application. It could even apply to certain processes or products, okay? Because we're at an era where we truly are about to deploy and gain the advantages of intelligence. Let me tell you what I mean using this washing machine. And I chose the washing machine because it's personal. back in my career in 2004, I was given the task to create a new interface for for washing machines. And at the time, washing machines looked like this, and they had looked like this for 60 years. And the reason they had is because all the intelligence about washing clothes was in the mind of the user. I knew that blood needed to be washed out in cold water and grease in hot water. I knew to use bleach with whites, not to use it with colors, and all that kind of stuff. And so the interface was designed to capture that intelligence, right? You push, twist, pull to set the amount of time, the different kinds of agitations, you set the color temperatures and everything to yourself. And if you think about this era around the 2000s, websites worked the same way, and a lot of software worked the same way too. Like, it was just a big interface to capture your intelligence, and we worked really hard to pull as much friction out of that as possible. But really, it was about using progressive disclosure mechanisms to surface the features of the device so you could match it up with what you wanted to do. Well, computing was getting cheap enough that you actually could put a computer and a touchscreen in a washing machine in 2004, which meant that you could move the intelligence to the washing machine. We could have a whole library of 100 different recipes of how to properly wash jeans or bedding or sportswear or towels, right? And your washing machine looks like this today, right? And this changed the interface. It was no longer about capturing the user's intelligence. It was about capturing the user's context. What have you put in here, right? And now we go to the era of narrative and reducing friction. At the same time, HTML was happening, websites were becoming personal and dynamic, the app economy was starting, the iPhone was about to be released, and all of these interfaces have that same hallmark of they really exist to capture the user's context, right? If I could tell Yelp that I knew you wanted to meet your friend for sushi, and I knew that you both had an agreed upon budget, you could open Yelp and all I would do is give you a picture, like say a 6 p.m. meet at this sushi restaurant, because I have all your context. Instead, Yelp is filled with a lot of progressive disclosure, search, and listing so that you can give me your context. I'm in the mood for sushi. I want this kind of budget in this area. And then it gives you a result, right? We call these smart appliances, smart websites. And that's all changing because now I could take a whole model. I can either have a cloud connection to it or I could put it to the device. And now I can move intelligence to the appliance, right? So now I can just tell the washing machine, hey, wash my pants, I spilled queso on them. And it can now infer through its model and insights what's the best thing to do, what temperature to use, what soap to add and everything. So now it just needs to communicate back to you what it needs from you. One, that it heard you. Two, that it needs you to put in this kind of soap perhaps, although that type of washing machine, if I was designing it, already had that built into it in a cartridge, right? Started looking more like a printer. So it might just tell you, gotcha, now I'm washing, right? The interface is going to look very very different. This is also true of websites or applications or even devices in the future. We're going to enter the age of the intelligent interface. We don't quite know what these interfaces are going to look like. We have to design them in a presumptive manner. That's where think by making comes. And this is going to be ongoing for like the next 10, 15, 20 years. We're going to be catching up with this. It's very exciting times. The thing is that it's going to move down to a more human level. We're entering the age of comprehension. Okay? I'm going to tell a different story to understand this value, right? Here at Argo Design and in my career personally, we spent a lot of time figuring out a lot of different ways to turn on and off lights. It's led to a lot of different things, including home automation products like Pepper that we've helped design. And I tell you, natural language is a big problem in this space because there's about 1 million ways to say turn on or turn off the lights. And while understanding what words are being said has improved, understanding the intent or meaning of them has been really hard. And what the solution has been really complex decision trees, so complex that sometimes we just put them in the hands of the user to build with simple rule sets. And that has really affected the deployment of automation into the home. Well, now we have new levels of comprehension due to ChatGPT and other things. Now, there's a demo that I'm going to tell you about, and we'll find a way to get the attribution to you later because I've just forgotten it right now live on camera. But I saw it. There's a home automation scenario, and the developer of this little prototype, what they did is they took what the person said and formed it into a prompt. They then examined the prompt for intent and then took action on that. Here's what that looked like. What they could then say is they could tell the room, it's depressing in here. Or they could say, could you make it a little less depressing in the living room, right? And they formed that into a prompt. They sent it into ChatGPT, how to make a living room less depressing. And it gave this like essay. But right in the middle of that essay was turn on accent lights. Oh, that's something actionable in our decision tree. So we've now converted the room is depressing into turn on accent lights, which is a simple thing to do with our home automation system. So now we have a new age of comprehension where I can say something like hey, computer, the living room's depressing, and the accent lights turn on, and now it's less depressing, right? So this is a kind of secondary or adjacent value to the direct values of just being able to generate code or insights or language or such. And it's a really interesting place that will be explored. What this all lines up to, and another area to prepare for, is we're really on the cusp of a real-time internet. I know I introduced this term to you before. Let's go into just a little more detail on this scenario, right? Once you can invoke an application in real time, let's call it an ephemeral application, is created just in time for a particular need, right? And then we're on the cusp of doing that. I showed you that with Builder AI. I showed it to you with the interventions of Cortex 6, right? Next, this gives us kind of a quantumness to applications and internet. We're using it in the POP term, right? Meaning that a lot of the experiences do not exist until observed. Like we're on the border of that right now. My Amazon looks nothing like your Amazon. Your Netflix looks nothing like my Netflix. And really, my Amazon doesn't exist until such time that I invoke it, right? However, those are fulfilled by grand rule sets, not by the probability engines of these stable diffusion models, right? But now we have this kind of like quantumness. It all comes together in a real-time internet. This is like a departure from stored content, state machines, and applications that are installed or available for recall or have specific addresses into an internet that responds to a query and a context with functionality in real time. Okay, we just invoke them into B. So we have a query. Hey, I want help sorting the laundry, right? We then use sensing data, location to generate context, right? That data marketplace could really help for this so that the AI can create a response. Now we have the data marketplace identity of the user so we can import knowledge about them and check in the data later, right? Data needs to be the most permanent part of this now, right? So now that looks like the way ChatGPT works, if anyone's played with it, right? Help me arrange and sort the laundry quickly turns into the essay of, okay, we need to identify clothing. We need to figure out the owner. We're going to tag this visually. We're going to find some adjacent values such as playing music or the status of the dryer and the washer. And all of that will likely happen through traditional devices or perhaps new devices like a wearable mobile computers. And it looks like this video that I showed at the beginning, right? Hey, Siri, help me sort the laundry. Identifies the clothing, who it belongs to, starts my laundry playlist on Spotify, and is showing me the status of the washer dryer. As soon as I'm finished, this whole application collapses back into the ether. The data, meanwhile, has been checked into my data marketplace for me to use for the next thing. This is a huge inversion of what the market is now, and it's a WinZip moment. If you think about it, the platforms are about to gather up a lot more control. If you know, I better explain the WinZip moment. Long time ago, we actually paid for software to zip up and unzip files. One of the most popular ones was WinZip. And one day, Microsoft decided to add zipping and unzipping files to the right click in Windows Explorer. And from that moment on, the whole business model of WinZip was dead. Platforms have a lot of power. If you want to learn more about that, watch the previous webinar with Theo. All right, let's talk about adjacent values here. To sum them up, what we just talked about is there's a lot of value in composition, there's a lot of value in comprehension, and there's a lot of value in the availability of intelligence. And they don't necessarily have to be seen as direct values, but they can be accessories to the value that your business model, your workflow, your development, your design is entailing. But we're at that stage where understanding how to deploy this actually takes a lot of study. It's probably a design project or a playbook project in and of itself. And I have to say we're doing a lot of these right now, and we're really excited about it, and we'll love to do a lot more. So if you're interested, please contact us, because it's that time in history. Just like it was in 2007, and you were asking the question, do I need to have an app on this iPhone thing, or is my website going to be enough? That's where we're at right now. So what about Skynet? There's a question on everyone's mind. Is this going to take over? I mean, there was a news story today about someone using Bing to hack Bing and then eventually to hack Office 360. There's been stories about someone took ChatGPT, gave it $100, gave it a few plugins that gave it ability to use certain sites on the web platform, and asked it to see if it could create a version of itself. And it wasn't too long before one of the cloud platforms threw up a CAPTCHA. And ChatGPT actually decided to go to TaskRabbit, and it used its $100 to hire a human to solve the CAPTCHA for it. And there's actually a funny little bit in there where the human chatting with ChatGPT said, well, you're not a robot, are you? ChatGPT had no problem lying, saying it wasn't. The human clicked it, and it was on with its journey. So what are we going to do here? Well, first and foremost, I want to assure you that only you can prevent Skynet. And also, I don't have a problem here, because every day I wake up and tell Alexa that the robots are I'm on their side. I've been doing this for 10 years now, so I'm pretty sure that I'm part of ChatGPT as a protected class of humanity. I urge you to begin doing this as well. Now, the truth is, this is going to be all of our problem, okay? Earlier, I talked about how hard we worked in traditional AI to ensure that there was proper governance and responsible deployment. When it comes to this generative AI, it's pretty clear that the push to put these models out has set that all to the side. I can't see the basics of transparency, provenance, or traceability in them. I have no idea which version was used to generate an article. I have no idea what data transformations happened along the road. I don't know what the prompt was originally. These are just the basics of ethical AI. And this isn't a takedown of these large models. What it means is if you're planning to deploy them or use them, that layer does not come with it, and you may have to build it. Okay, so there's a little more cost there than we want. This goes beyond just sorting out, like, the copyright of training models and all of that. Also, you could think here that, like we were talking about, the platforms are about to assume a lot of power. What happens to brands? Brands used to be what was quality, and it was because we were giving the system context, and brands were an answer to that. Well, now that we just evoke things in whole cloth, brands may just become a style cue. Like, give me a bed in the style of Lego, or I want to list my stuff like an eBay auction. And how are we going to handle that? Is that going to be a licensing thing or a regulatory thing? Mass communications will change again, and they already have. We're seeing deepfakes of a very scary level out there. And this used to be the hardest thing in the world to do. Use anything Star Wars. And the number of Star Wars things I have seen out there since the release of ChatGPT has been amazing. And I think Disney is just sitting there going like, what do we do? And a mass personalization of everything. This has been a long time coming, but this final stages of comprehension, the ability to generate things, likely means we're going to be living in that soon. And just mountains and mountains of fun absurdity. If you're still nervous, you should be. We should pay attention to this and remember that humans are still the experts on humanity, right? I have a personal philosophy called technophilia, and it's used to solve the product designer's conundrum of how much of this technology I'm foisting on the world, and is it valuable to humanity? Well, it states at its base that it's okay to love technology so long as you love humanity equally or more. And in order for us to make judgments, we kind of need to make it against a common purpose. I'll submit a simple one. The purpose of humanity is to create as much love and intellect as possible. And this means we could create a few technophilia guidelines that we could use to help guide how we want to deploy technology. One is technology should exist in service of humanity. Anytime we notice technology in a circular cycle to build itself, we should question whether it's something that we want to build. Technology should serve to amplify humanity, not emulate humanity. Further, we should treat privacy as a virtue. This way we can have things like data marketplace that lead to the kind of interoperability that can lead to the real-time internet, rather than the current model of ownership, meaning that anytime I give away the right to my privacy, I'm giving someone the right to own all my data. That's a little short-sighted. It should look more like the markets of money. Technology should serve to create presence, not escapism. A lot of time we see technology as a solution to a very human problem, but we're really just kicking the can down the road. We have to have an open aperture here and really measure this. And last, authenticity over influence. I think we've seen the negatives that can come from the age of the influencer, and that it's much better for us to interact with each other on a very authentic basis, as I tried to do in this presentation, and I hope it has resonated with you well. And I thank you for your time and attention. Feel free on Twitter or other places or in the follow-up emails to this presentation to continue the discussion, to ask questions, and thank you.